very cognizant of what we were eating, of like diets and things. They ate a macrobiotic diet, which is similar. You guys have eaten at Casa.
Yes.
Casa de Luz. That's macrobiotic food. So it's very like organic, nourishing, not tons of flavor, spices, nothing like extreme. It's all very just like mellow, nourishing food. And so that was the main diet for most of the time growing up. So they had it dialed in a lot of ways, and they were doing a good job, but I was very isolated. And so what that created for me as a kid was kind of a fear of the outside world. We were in our little spiritual bubble, and it's not that we never left. The nearest big town is called Bozeman, and it's like 2 hours away. Yeah, great place.
It is cool.
But that was like the big city to us, and Bozeman is not a big city by any
big.
means. Like there's probably 50,000 people, and maybe 60 because it's been grown. It's like doubled in size recently. But so at the time 30,000 people. But that was the big city, and so going to Bozeman felt like going to another planet. It was like, oh my God, all this stuff, and we'd go to the mall and we'd go shopping and all these things. So it was, and I would go on vacation, we'd visit relatives, but it wasn't very often. And so we were fairly isolated, and what it developed for me was this sense that things out there, outside of our little spiritual bubble, are evil. And so I developed a fear of it. I was like, first off, I'm better than it because it was all low consciousness.
Right.
And second off, I'm also afraid of it. And so it was a challenging thing when we eventually left the community, which happened when I was 12.
What was the reason for you guys leaving? Was it a good or bad experience?
It was not a great experience. The leader passed away a few years previously, and so the community, I spoke earlier about shared vision, like it's important for a community to have a shared vision.
Yeah.
That shared vision that had been coming through the spiritual leader of this movement was no longer there. And so I was very young. I was like 9 or 10 at the time, but my sense of it was that diffused, and so there started becoming like splinter groups. And so there were a couple people who started saying, oh, now I'm channeling.
Yeah.
And I'm the next messenger. That's what they call it, the messenger. I'm the next messenger for the masters. And so a couple different people literally took people with them and moved to other places. And so the community started just kind of losing its steam in that way, like losing the energy. And it's still there. It still exists. And mostly it's a publishing company, and they publish all the books and the audios and everything, because for decades they were just pumping out content. If they would compare it to like podcasters or like media stuff today, like their publishing was insane.
Really?
They had a magazine. They were like hundreds
What was
of
the name of it again?
The Summit Lighthouse.
Look this up.
Yeah.
I'm very intrigued by this because I grew up in a very like super conservative religious world, and so this kind of stuff is fascinating.
Yeah. And there's a lot of shared experience in that, because it's like ours was really unique in like in the spiritual beliefs, but the experience of living in something like that is isolated and more restricted, or
the basis is spirituality, religion, or something.
Right.
There's similar things.
Yeah, there's definitely a shared experience there.
I'm sorry, one more time. What was it called?
The Summit Lighthouse.
Summit Lighthouse.
So that all happened. The community kind of lost steam, and my parents, I have 2 younger brothers, and so they had 3 sons at this time. My parents were like, we just gotta move somewhere and like raise our family, make some more money, raise a family, because they'd been making money there, but a lot of it was volunteer. A lot of it, people had donated their savings to the movement in order to set this up. Like they literally had moved. It had been in Malibu, California, before moving to Montana, but a lot of people had like poured their entire life into this, creating this new spiritual community in Montana, and now it was kind of like fizzling.
Yeah.
And so my parents were like, all right, let's go somewhere else. So ultimately, they looked at moving all over. It's funny, Austin was one of the places.
Great.
I remember my dad going on a trip here and like interviewing and stuff, and I was like, Austin is so far away, and like Texas was such a weird concept to me at the time.
Yeah.
And now here I am. But ultimately we moved to Helena, Montana, just like 3 hours away, capital of Montana. Not a big place, 30,000 people, but to me a huge city. It's so different than living out in the woods with community, with all my friends,
Yeah.
with people who have a similar spiritual understanding. And so we moved, and I was 12, and essentially I was so upset about it. I was so upset about leaving my friends, leaving everything that I'd known. And a lot of it was that fear that I talked about. It's like I developed this really strong fear of the outside world.
Right.
That I decided, because of the name Helena, Montana, I decided we were moving to hell. And I remember saying that to everyone. I was like, we're moving to hell. And so that's literally what my experience was. It felt like we like fell from grace, and we'd been living in heaven, and we moved into this city, this small apartment in the middle of the town, and I just like made it up in my head that we were in hell. And so that's the experience that I created for myself throughout my teenage years. So from literally age 12 through high school, it just progressively got darker for me, because I had like set in my mind that this is not a good time.
Yeah. And then you saw that. Like,
yeah.
That's what happened.
I created it.
You created that reality.
Yeah. And at the time, I mean, like looking back, I can say I created it, because now I see it as that, and I remember making that decision.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was just like, I was angry at my parents. I was like, why did we do this? And like, obviously they had their reasons. It's like, we have to raise you. Right. But I just couldn't understand that. Like in my mind, our lives had just gotten so much worse.
Right.
And probably for them too. It's like they were experiencing the same shock of like, oh my God, that now I have to interact with people who aren't of the same spiritual mindset, who aren't all eating organic food that we grew in our own gardens, who aren't all raising their kids in Montessori school and monitoring what they're watching on TV, like all these sorts of things. It was all like this whole scary world. Yeah. And it was intense. Like it honestly felt like, beyond like being hellish, it was like it was like I got dropped on another planet.
Really?
We started going to public school, and just like I'm like interacting with kids and I remember I was in 6th grade, and so it was the start of 6th grade, started middle school. And I remember the first week of school, just like a lot of times just be like interacting with someone or having someone talking to me, and just not even knowing what was going on, just being like, and maybe just walking away, like not speaking with them, because I was just like, I don't know how to interact with you. Like I'm not sure what's happening.
What
happens?
Yeah.
Do you feel like it was a combination of the social aspect, and then also like they're so far away from who you're used to talking to, or was it just one or the other?
It was all of it. And the fear, like a lot of it was the fear. It was like at that point I had an understanding. It's like the people will have a different level of consciousness, and then that was a bad thing versus like something for me to connect with and like understand and like communicate. And so it's like I had friends and like I could interact, but I remember it just being very shocking, especially at first. And then as the years went on, I just like kept getting angrier and angrier, because, and there's a lot of things that roll into that, but a big piece of it was my health. Like my health started tanking. Like within 6 months of us moving there, I had great eyesight. Like my eyesight went bad. Really? I had to get glasses and contacts. I started feeling super tired, and I would attribute that to a lot of things, but it's like we started eating a different diet. We weren't eating food that was raised there. Like all of a sudden I was eating standard American diet, and like my parents did their best to feed us how we'd been eating at home, but it kind of started going out the window, and we were eating pizza, and I was having burgers at school, and we were drinking soda, and I was having candy, like all these things that we didn't have.
Had you ever had that stuff before?
Like here and there,
but very rare.
Yeah, like growing up, like candy, like sugar especially, hugely off limits. It was like we never ate sugar. We ate all the alternatives, but there was this understanding that like refined processed sugar is a drug,
which it is,
and that the majority of the world's addicted to. And so we would, because we didn't have it, when we did have it, it was literally like cocaine. Like I remember birthday parties where someone's parents were just like, we don't care, I'll get them soda. And so we all had soda, and everyone would lose their shit. Yeah. Like literally, and it's not like that for other kids who have that all the time. Right. It's just normalized that like kids are crazy, but like we weren't normally like that. Like there was generally more coherence and like calmness, and just like when we had sugar, usually ended in a fight. Someone was throwing rocks, something got broken, everyone had to go home, and it was not a great birthday party. And that's just, I remember those experiences, and it's like, that was insane. Like, we were literally being handed drugs. And
that's been normalized.
Yeah.
That's insane, but it's like, it's so crazy because you had to have those first 12 years to understand what was happening outside of that.
Right.
Which that's a great gift, honestly.
Yeah.
To be, like, aside from all the craziness, but like to be able to see, like, wow, this actually isn't normal. Like to drink and eat this kind of stuff and then act like a crazy person.
Right. It's been hugely valuable because that, I had that experience. Then I experienced the rapid decline in my health. So throughout my teenage years, like into high school. In high school, I was deeply depressed, like suicidal thoughts most every day, super low energy, and I just was in a hole. And there were literally days at school where I wouldn't talk to anyone. Like, I wouldn't say anything the entire day. Like, I remember instances where someone would, like a teacher would call on me, or someone would try to say something to me, and I couldn't I would be thinking, but it's like I couldn't say words because I'd become so unaccustomed to interacting socially that, like, I couldn't talk. And so I would just be like, and the person would walk away or just be like, wow, you're crazy. Wow. And that's how bad it got, and like how quiet and shy and withdrawn I became. And so that was like through high school, and then I went away. Luckily, because of how I'd been raised, school was very easy, so I did very well. It's like I didn't really have to try at all. Like I never remember studying in high school.
That's the American schooling system.
Yeah.
Is that because you're naturally really good at school, or because you were taught?
I think we had
knew so much when you were.
I think we had been, like I was raised in a Montessori school, which is learning by doing.
Yeah.
And so I had like a very rapid creative mind, and I loved learning. And so that carried through, and it was like if I heard something in class, I didn't need to hear it again. It was like, okay, I've got it.
Yeah.
And it was that sort of thing. So like studying, or some of the ways that other students have to like complete their schooling, and it just wasn't really how I had to do it. So luckily I did very well in school, and so I got a scholarship to go to school at a bunch of different places, but I ended up going to a small school called Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. And at that point I had an understanding that I could change. That through it all, like through my teenage years when it was super challenging, there was this like underlying idea, or like a little spark where I knew there was something else. And whatever that was, like it never got so dark where like I actually acted on a suicidal thought or anything like that, but because there was this underlying idea that like it'll get better. And so by the end of high school I was like, well, I'm just gonna go get away from Montana, get away from all this, and just start over.
I'm gonna go somewhere with Saint in the name.
Yeah.
I'm
exactly.
gonna go from hell to
well, it's funny because I've lived in St. Louis, San Jose, San Francisco, San Diego. Austin's the first one.
Wow.
Yeah. They all have Saint.
Have you ever thought about that?
I have. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Like qualifications for living. What does it start with?
It must be a holy city.
So
only the holiest.
Yeah.
What was it like? Because now, obviously, like you're a social butterfly at this point. Right?
Yeah.
So like, what was it like transitioning? I'm assuming something happened at Washington University where you started to interact, and like maybe you found your group. Like, what was that? What did that look like?
Yeah. So that college for me was very much like coming out of my shell, and I had a sense of like by that point, like I did this to myself. It's like I could have been social. Like I really put myself in a hole, and I was choosing not to interact or not be social. Because it's not like in my teenage years I didn't have friends, or there weren't people who would have been friends with me. Like I played sports and things like that. It's just like as I went, I just was more and more in my mind, and like more and more afraid, and the anxiety just built up, and all this tension built up to the point where I became like that.
Yeah.
But I'd still had interactions. Like I still knew it was possible, and so I was like, okay, let's like get out of this. And oddly enough, like the thing that really helped was alcohol at first. Like I went to college and there's parties, and so at first I was like very much against it. I was like, I'm not drinking. Like that's way off limits, like that sort of thing.
That's
But
like, we aren't allowed to have that.
yeah, like I'm